The bottom line is you're going to have conservatives and Republicans running on raising taxes so that they can keep the school choice dollars flowing. And in the meantime, that private school down the street that costs $10,000 a year over a series of price increases over 4 or 5 years, now $18,000 because they know that the 100 seats they have in their auditorium, that they've got more demand by it, and they know that the parents can already pay $10,000 out of their own pockets, so they just raise it to $18,000.
You're listening to a special session school choice episode of Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowlin.
And I'm Sean Graham.
We are thankful you're joining us today for this conversation. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. We want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God, so please don't hesitate to send us any questions or comments via email. If you need additional resources on today's topic, or if you want any information we mentioned in today's episode, email Sean at shawn@tnchristian.com. He will gladly send you what you need to push back against this just terribly named so-called school choice scam. Today's show is brought to you in the Memphis area by Herbie Systems. Give Herbie Systems a call at 901-451-8214 for all your lawn care needs. Since 1984, Herbie Systems has been the premier lawn care and landscape company in the Mid-South. So give Herbie Systems a call today. That's 901-451-8214, or visit herbiesystems.com and let them kill your weeds. Today's scriptures are from the 7th chapter of Luke, verses 31 through 35. And the Lord said, "Whereunto then shall I liken the men of this generation, and to what are they like? They are like unto children, sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another and saying, We have piped unto you, and ye have not danced. We have mourned to you, and ye have not wept. For John the Baptist came neither eating bread nor drinking wine, and ye say, He hath a devil. The Son of Man is come eating and drinking, and ye say, Behold, a gluttonous man and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. But wisdom is justified of all her children." Listeners, we have been telling you for a while. We did, it feels like a third of our season last year on this topic, but we've been telling you for a while that Tennessee Governor Bill Lee could not get his school choice scam passed if you held it to normal scrutiny through the legislative process. Last year's failure to pass the unfunded mandate is proof it would have failed again in this session. So the governor's called a special session on January 27th to short-circuit the legislative process and to ram this school scam bill that is loaded with pork and payoffs. You have to reach out to your elected officials now, not next week. They need to hear your voice clearly now. Tell them this is not a conservative bill. Tell them you don't want to face property tax increases to pay for this, like other states have already had to do. Tell them to fix the broken education system that schools have, because this bill doesn't address the 80% of kids that can't read at grade level. Tell your elected officials you expect them to vote no on so-called school choice.
Listeners, we heard rumblings of these tricks by the governor for months. So we want to take today's show and give you even more evidence of how bad this school choice scam. It's a scam, and it's going to be bad. We sat down to talk with America's largest homeschooling CEO. This is a man who has seen firsthand what disaster. It's just been terrible in other states and even in other countries. We'll have a second part to this episode next week, so please listen now and share this content with your church, your neighbors, and your elected officials. If you need more information about this or you want additional facts, just email me at Sean, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com, and I'll get you the information you need to help expose the socialist scam our lame duck governor is trying to leave us with.
So our guest today is Robert Bortons, a friend of the show. This is your second time coming on, I believe, Mr. Bortons. I want to thank you for that. But you're a homeschooling expert. You're a homeschooling dad. You navigate both the practical aspects of homeschooling. You guys have a well-developed, mature curriculum that is also expanding. But you guys are expanding because just like the homeschooling founder, R.J. Rushdoony, the founder of homeschooling in America, the founder of Christian education, became over time a legal expert. He was called on to testify in cases like what we saw in the 80s in Texas, the Leeper case, which is like the only court transcript I've ever stayed up all night reading like it was an action novel as I watched him whip the attorneys that the state of Texas sent, but you're kind of migrating into a role like that. You're becoming an expert on homeschooling in the various structures in various states. So instead of simply introducing you as the CEO of Classical Conversations, I'm going to introduce you as a man who is an expert on homeschooling in a tremendous number of jurisdictions, not just statewide in the United States, but internationally at this point. So welcome to the show, Robert Bortons.
Hey, I'm glad to be back and continuing to fight for educational freedom and independence. And, that's kind of the last stand, I believe, here in the United States, because I've seen what happens overseas when we give up that independence for government handouts.
Yeah. And just so everybody knows what I'm talking about, this is a series of tweets that you've been making on the loss of independence in homeschooling. And it's been a combination of tweets that are international in focus. You recently tweeted on what was happening in Sweden with their homeschooling, which I think everybody's like, what in the world does Sweden have to do with the United States? But we've also seen things happening in the state of Mississippi since they, have been working on school choice. We've seen statements from government officials in Oklahoma, Texas. But let's start with Sweden. What is going on in Sweden? You predominantly deal in the United States in your educational efforts, but what made you comment on Sweden recently?
Yeah, so when I first came on board with Classical Conversations in 2012, we actually went to our very first and the first ever global home education conference. And the idea behind it was held in Germany. It's one of a handful of quote unquote Western countries where home education is illegal. And in Germany, they have very generous tax breaks and school choice options there.
So they have school choice in Germany, just not homeschooling.
Correct.
Oh,
if your church wants to start a school, the government will help subsidize that school and those things. I don't know how much curriculum independence they have, but the 4 walls that you want to do school in, you do get a choice on which 4 walls you want to send your kids to. And so that's what happened. I have a friend, Alex Newman. He has a show as well. And he was homeschools his kids. And he was actually in Sweden in the early 90s and came back to the U.S. When he saw what was happening. But he was in Sweden in 1992, a conservative, pro-freedom platform government was elected, and they passed the sweeping school choice bill. And basically, it was going to be, I think, 80% of whatever municipality was spending on their students. Sound familiar? They would have to provide in funding to the students if they wanted to go to, a church school or, some other educational option in K through 12. And so that's how it started. And of course, it was celebrated by, the think tanks pushing school choice. But just a few years later, the socialist government was put in place. Imagine that, a country where sometimes one group gets elected and other times another group elected. We don't ever experience that here in North America and the United States. And they started putting, hey, we're giving you, $8,000 or whatever the number is a year to educate your kids, but we don't know how the money's being spent. Are these kids getting a good education? So they just slowly begin adding, different requirements. And then they invested in a national curriculum. Believe it or not, Texas has a Texas curriculum that they're considering right now as we're recording. So a national curriculum, and the schools were highly encouraged to adopt it, but not required. And then eventually they said, well, everyone needs to be, in the name of equality, we want to make sure everyone is having an equal opportunity at success and everyone's getting the same thing. Every single institution has to teach the national curriculum. And at the same time, there's no reason for anyone to homeschool because, and this was happened just 19 years later. So 1992 was the first bill. 2011, they outlawed homeschooling because since we're paying everyone's education anyways, there's no reason that a parent would need to do it at home because we're funding it. And basically, every single school in Sweden is accredited. And if you don't teach the curriculum how they want it to be taught, that you would lose your accreditation. And they've also, outlawed private payment for education too in that country, which, obviously could not be done probably here. But the main point is that even good Christian teachers at good Christian churches are forced to teach LGBT secularization to the kids, climate change, ESG, whatever 3 or 4 or 5 letter acronym that the United Nations is pushing, they have to teach in their schools. And so they have to, and it only took 19 years for it to happen. So basically in one generation.
We've talked about Sweden. We've talked about Mississippi, but surely this isn't happening in Texas. I mean, is the same thing happening in Texas?
Well, Texas is working on passing a school choice bill this upcoming session. They tried to pass it last time and it didn't get through. The people who want school choice, I don't know the exact amount, but I was hearing tens of millions of dollars into specific races. I don't know if they topped $100 million in primaries being spent, but somewhere well above 10 million and probably below 100 million to get their people in. And of course, you got to think who's going to benefit if I'm going to spend $100 million there. So, someone's benefiting on the backside. And of course, anyone who knows anything about welfare programs, they're just really pass-throughs to other entities. So it's like Class Wallet or stand to make billions of dollars while the money gets passed through other people's hands and in groups like that. Arizona, which has been the gold standard for universal school choice because it has no strings attached to it upon being passed, just like this Tennessee bill, added educational funding to public schools. So if you're going to say, hey, we want to make it so kids can leave the system, but now you're adding funds to the system, how does that work out? Because now the places that you're leaving to have a higher threshold of competition as far as at least money is being concerned. Arizona's blown their budget up. Like they don't know how that they're going to continue to pay for these without, running tax increases. So
and when you say blown up, you don't mean just like overspent. You mean like doubled.
Yeah. I mean, they've tried to spin it in a good way. This is so popular that, instead of spending $600 million on this, we spent $1.2 billion on it. That'd be like the federal government saying, hey, our policies are so good. Instead of, having a balanced budget, we had $2 trillion a year to our deficit. That's how popular our programs are. And so, they try to spin it that way, but ultimately it has to go, someone has to pay for it. And so it's either going to be, in taxes to you and your family or taxes to your neighbors. And, that's the bottom line is you're going to have conservatives and Republicans running on raising taxes so that they can keep the school choice dollars flowing. And in the meantime, that private school down the street that costs $10,000 a year over a series of price increases over 4 or 5 years is now $18,000 because they know that the 100 seats they have in their auditorium, that they've got more demand by it. And they know that the parents can already pay $10,000 out of their own pockets. So they just raise it to $18,000. And so that's ultimately why Sweden made it so that you couldn't charge fees above and beyond what they were subsidizing, because that's what the natural thing is for any sort of organization. If the government's going to give out free money, go ahead and take it, line your own pockets, add in some programs, pay better, do whatever you want to do with it. Because your customers aren't paying for it. The government's seizing it from your neighbors with force.
Yeah, you said that that this has got to start in the pulpits. I don't necessarily see that happening at this stage in our country because of the quality that's in our pulpits by and large. I don't see the focus being on much outside of escapism. I hate to say it. I think it's going to start in our homeschools, and I think it's going to start in our private Christian schools. It's going to start with parents who are very involved in their children in their children's lives, who teach their children.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you get up there and you're told you have to compromise, and if you want to be able to do this, you have to be willing to do that. And again, unless you're willing to, I'll just compromise for a short period of time, but then you get that callous over your heart. And so, very few legislators are willing to stand up there and fight and do it in an articulate way. God bless you all. I'm thinking about running, sometime in the future, but you talk to some of these people and they get in, for good reasons, but they do not necessarily have a comprehensive biblical worldview that has been formed by a church that, teaches the gospel. Something like, I think Barna says 6% of, Americans have a biblical worldview that used to be in the high teens, I think 20 or 30 years ago. And so again, that starts at the pulpit. We can't expect, our culture to embrace our Christian conservative ideas when we can't even articulate them properly for the group of people that have, quite frankly, been assigned to do that, in my opinion. So, yeah, I do think we are seeing more bold leadership. I am encouraged by, some of the people that Trump has put into office and is considering putting into his cabinet, people who are willing to fight. But you can just see how much they're just tearing those people down, finding every little thing, anything that could be anything, and trying to throw it against the wall to tarnish their reputations. And so, most people, if you're getting paid $10,000 to do a job, to volunteer at your local school board, or, effectively a volunteer position, maybe getting a little bit of compensation because you want to make things better. But then the local newspaper that's, ran by some woke, editorial board is just, trashing you publicly day in and day out. Most people just don't find that that's worth the effort, and they don't have that community at their church that's going to back them up and is writing op-eds and, countering the narrative.
Well, let me take us to Tennessee specifically. And in the legislation we see right now, we see some very real issues. And I'd like to hear your comments on what you think. Is this what other people have done? Are they just repeating the same thing? Like right now, our governor has come out and said that any of the funding to a school, when a student is removed and he or by his family chooses to go to another school using a voucher, that school that the child is removed from would always continue to be funded at the same level. We also see that there are initiatives that don't come out of our education funding to pay for gyms, roads, bridges, infrastructure stuff for these small communities to build schools, or supposedly, and it's clearly a bribe in my book. We're seeing a lot of stuff thrown in here, and I don't want to give these guys too much credit as if they're geniuses. Is this what's being done everywhere?
Yes. So it depends on how unpopular school choice bills are. So the more things they're throwing in like that, must mean that it's extremely unpopular in some areas, because almost every public school in the States, typically they get funded based on students' participation. So that's why many of these states have started saying, oh, these homeschoolers can take 2 or 3 classes, because once they get on the rolls, they can get funding for you, even if you're not full time. And so they're trying to make it more palatable, again, to those legislators in those areas where they can vote yes for this bill, but the funding doesn't go away for their public schools. So you're actually at that point, not only are you adding, I don't know the dollar amount, say $7,000 that the government now has to collect in taxes from somewhere else. So like in Arizona, at least they made the argument, well, we were spending $10,000 per student, and if they leave the public school system, now we'll just spend $7,000. So that's a $3,000 savings. Versus in Tennessee, it sounds like it's so unpopular that they're saying, not only are we going to continue to fund that school at $10,000, but we're going to give you $7,000. So that's not a $3,000 savings from the state, but a $7,000 increase from the state.
Well, let me ask you a question, Robert, and I'll preface this with, we talk to people in Florida who take the state money that the state of Florida offers to them, and their children have to be interviewed. They do a home inspection essentially. And to me, that's less freedom. But we've all sort of agreed that when the government gives money to people, it is a conservative position to say, well, you need some accountability for how that money's used. So I get that. But when you look at all of the states that have passed so-called school choice, which I'm so angry Sean refuses to call it so-called school choice every time. I've been telling him for 6 months, that's our biggest marketing thing. So-called school choice, Robert, what states that have embraced this model have a freer, less encumbered homeschooling environment now?
Well, a couple things. One is, I think homeschooling in general, we've got a pretty big group that will show up on legislators' doors and make sure that they don't pass bad things. Even in the state of California, Democrats have a supermajority everywhere, and in general, they're the type that like to put legislation on us. They've had quite a difficult time because homeschoolers will just show up in mass and say, leave us alone. But California has a form of school choice with vouchers, and those people they do require things from because they're not homeschoolers, right? They're just educating, in the four walls of their home, being subsidized by the government, and they do tell things. But right now we have the higher moral ground. We do not take your money, therefore you have no right to, legislate us. You should not add strings to us because we have done nothing to ask, for those strings. But as soon as you start taking the money, then you've said, yes, you have a business in my home, that you have a legitimate claim to what I'm doing because you are now funding it. And so, with like Mississippi, even in Oklahoma, of course, as a Democrat that, published it, the bill. And of course, it's not going to get anywhere right now in Oklahoma. But, I'm old enough to remember when Colorado was a solid red state, and you could have probably passed all sorts of great things and not expect anything to happen. And now look at it. Kentucky, when they put school choice in front of the voters in Kentucky, a red state, they voted it down, I think, like 60% to 40%. And why was that? Because they seek their independence. School choice is not as popular as the politicians as they want to think it is, or as groups like Americans for Prosperity and Corey D. and those type of people like to say it is with the voters. So, in fact, I saw one poll that showed voters who vote Democrat have a higher positive opinion of school choice than conservative voters. So it's actually, when you poll the people who have kids and how they vote, it's more popular among Democrat parents than it is
well, Robert, I want to thank you for this time. I appreciate you coming in to speak with us on this topic and to just open your soul with us on how this issue is affecting America and specifically to Tennessee. I thank you for all you guys have done, and I appreciate the work that you've done in Classical Conversations.
Well, thank you all for everything you're doing. Like, I'm only one person in one spot. I don't have that New Testament ability to just show up somewhere else as I'm walking. So we need you all and more people on the ground talking about these dangers, because I can talk about it as much as I want, but if it's not compelling, if you look, this is why I tell people would love for someone to just convince me that I'm wrong, because I can make way more money than I do now. And so I really do think that this is a moral issue. And so for Christians, if anyone can find any Bible verse that would indicate that this is an acceptable way to pay for Christian education, please find me on X, Facebook, Instagram, shoot me an email. I am, that will be my golden nugget. That will be my ticket to private airplanes and drivers and, sports tickets and look, instead of being shunned at these conservative events I go to, I can be celebrated and get invited to all the cool parties that I don't get invited to because I'm against school choice. I'm very open to someone tell me I'm wrong and giving me the proof. But so far, look, It's worth $100 million a year to me. So please, someone tell me, show me where I'm wrong.
Folks, we hope you gain as much from this conversation as we did. This talk with Robert Bortons of Classical Conversations should help us all see why we must keep this so-called school choice, this socialized private school out of Tennessee. Each week in Nashville, Memphis, and all over Tennessee, we talk about more ways to put your faith into action. But for these 2 weeks, we're specifically calling on you to reach out to your elected officials and tell them to stop the school choice scam. Folks, if you want more talking points on so-called school choice, just email Shawn, that's SHAWN, at tnchristian.com, and he will help you to get the information you need, or you can head on over to botradionetwork.com and search for Faith in Action. There we have links to 5 years of past shows on this and other topics. And until then, remember, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.